They cut me off without warning. No calls, no birthday texts, no explanation. Just gone. I was dead to them. But years later, when the FBI knocked on their door, guess who became their only hope of survival? The same daughter they abandoned.
I grew up in a house where truth was the enemy and appearances were everything. Our colonial revival sat on Maple Street like a monument to middle-class perfection. White picket fence, manicured lawn, American flag hanging from the wraparound porch. Inside, every surface gleamed with the kind of desperate cleanliness that screams, "We're better than you." My parents, Robert and Patricia Sinclair, were the town's golden couple. Dad owned Sinclair Construction, the company that built half the developments in our county. Mom ran the church ladies' auxiliary and organized charity galas that made the society pages. They smiled at everyone, knew everyone's name, and never missed a Sunday service. The perfect Christian family. My brother Jake was their masterpiece. 6'2", quarterback arms, and a smile that could sell ice to Eskimos. Honor roll every semester, homecoming king, early admission to Yale. Teachers loved him, girls swooned over him, and Dad would beam with pride whenever someone mentioned his golden boy. Jake had that effortless charm that made everything look easy, like success was just his natural state. Then there was me, Rachel, the glitch in their perfect matrix. I was the kid who asked why we needed to pretend to like the Hendersons when Mom called them tacky behind their backs. I was the one who pointed out that our charity donations were smaller than what Mom spent on a single dinner dress. I painted dark, twisted landscapes instead of happy flowers. I read books about existentialism instead of romance novels. I questioned everything, and they hated me for it.
"Why can't you be more like your brother?" became Mom's favorite refrain. She'd say it when I came home with paint under my fingernails, when I forgot to smile at her bridge club friends, when I dared to have an opinion that didn't match the family script. Dad was less subtle. He'd just shake his head and mutter about bad seeds and where did we go wrong. The final straw came 3 days after my 16th birthday. I'd saved up money from my part-time job at the local art supply store and gotten a tattoo, a tiny compass rose on my inner wrist no bigger than a quarter. The needle pointing north felt like a promise to myself. Stay true to your direction no matter what. I walked into the house that evening and Mom was arranging flowers in the foyer. She glanced at me, then did a double take when she saw the fresh ink peeking out from under my sleeve. "What is that?" Her voice was barely a whisper, like she was afraid to give voice to the horror. I pulled back my sleeve, revealing the simple black design. "It's a compass." The crystal vase slipped from her hands and shattered on the marble floor, water and white lilies spreading across the pristine surface. She stood there, staring at the broken glass, then at my wrist, then back at the glass, as if she couldn't process which disaster was worse. "Robert!" she screamed, her voice echoing through our 2-story house like a fire alarm. "Robert, get down here right now!" Dad thundered down the stairs, Jake trailing behind him with a curious expression. When Dad saw my tattoo, his face went through a spectrum of colors, red to purple to a shade of white I'd never seen on a living person. "You little—" He stopped himself, probably remembering we were in view of the front windows where the neighbors might see. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you understand what people will think?" "I think they'll think I got a tattoo," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Mom started crying then, not the pretty, delicate tears she used at charity events, but ugly, desperate sobs that made her mascara run in black streams down her cheeks. "How could you do this to us? How could you be so selfish?" Jake just stood there, shaking his head with that disappointed expression he'd perfected over the years. "Rachel, what were you thinking? This is going to reflect on all of us." That's when something inside me snapped, not with anger, but with clarity. I looked at these 3 people, my family, and realized I was looking at strangers, people who cared more about what the neighbors thought than about who I was as a person, people who saw my self-expression as a personal attack on their reputation.
I was thinking that it's my body, I said quietly. I was thinking that maybe, just once, I could do something that felt true to me without having to consider how it affects your image. Dad's jaw tightened. As long as you live under this roof, everything you do affects this family's image. And this, he gestured at my wrist like it was a festering wound, this is unacceptable. You're grounded, indefinitely. You'll cover that thing up, and when you turn 18, you'll get it removed. I looked at him for a long moment, then at Mom, still crying over her broken flowers, then at Jake, who was already pulling out his phone, probably texting his girlfriend about his crazy sister. No, I said. The word hung in the air like a challenge. I'm not covering it up, I'm not getting it removed, and I'm not staying here to pretend to be someone I'm not just to make you comfortable. I walked upstairs, pulled my old duffel bag from the closet, and started packing. I could hear them arguing downstairs, Mom's voice high and hysterical, Dad's low and angry, Jake trying to play peacemaker. None of them came up to try to stop me. 2 hours later, I walked out the front door with everything I owned in 2 bags. The compass on my wrist caught the streetlight as I headed toward the bus station, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was going in the right direction. I didn't look back. The first year was hell. I won't romanticize it. Poverty is brutal, especially when you're 17 and suddenly responsible for keeping yourself alive. I found a tiny studio apartment above a Chinese restaurant, the kind of place where the heat barely worked and the walls were so thin I could hear my neighbors' every conversation. The smell of grease and garlic became my constant companion. I worked 3 jobs to make rent: morning shift at a coffee shop, afternoons at the art supply store where I'd worked in high school, and weekends cleaning office buildings. My hands were perpetually stained with coffee grounds, paint, and industrial cleaner. I lived on ramen noodles and whatever day-old pastries the coffee shop let me take home. But something magical happened in that cramped, smelly apartment. For the first time in my life, I could breathe. I could paint at 2 a.m. without someone telling me to keep it down. I could read philosophy books without being asked why I couldn't just enjoy normal things. I could be angry, be sad, be confused, be anything I needed to be without having to perform happiness for an audience. I got my GED within 6 months and enrolled in community college. Business classes during the day, art classes at night. I discovered I had a talent for numbers, not just the creative kind, but the practical ones that made businesses run. While other students struggled with financial statements and market analysis, I found them as clear and logical as sheet music. My art evolved too. The dark, twisted landscapes of my teenage years gave way to something more complex. Pieces that explored the space between truth and performance, between who we are and who we pretend to be. I had my first gallery showing when I was 22, selling 3 pieces to pay for my transfer to the state university. I tried to stay connected to my family, at least at first. I sent birthday cards that went unacknowledged. I called on holidays and got voicemail. I sent Mom a photo of my college graduation, bachelor's degree in finance, summa cum laude, and never got a response. Eventually, I stopped trying. Jake, meanwhile, was living his golden life. His Facebook posts showed a steady stream of fraternity parties, spring break trips, and networking events. After Yale, he came back home to work at Dad's company, naturally sliding into the role of heir apparent. He got engaged to Ashley Monroe, a sorority princess whose family owned the local car dealership. Their engagement announcement in the town paper made me laugh.
The same paper that had once featured me in a police blotter for disturbing the peace during a downtown art installation. I graduated with my master's in finance when I was 25 and landed a job at a forensic accounting firm in the city. Turns out, all those years of seeing through my family's performances had given me a unique talent for detecting financial fraud. I could spot creative accounting from a mile away, could see the patterns in numbers that revealed when someone was lying about money.
I was good at my job. Really good. Within 3 years, I was running my own cases, testifying in court, helping prosecutors put white-collar criminals behind bars. I bought a condo, started a retirement fund, dated a few people who actually seemed to enjoy my company. I built a life that was mine, not a reaction to anyone else's expectations. But late at night, when the city was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts, I'd sometimes touch that compass tattoo and wonder about the people I'd left behind. I'd wonder if they ever missed me, if they ever regretted how things ended. I'd wonder if they were proud of what I'd accomplished, or if they even knew. I never expected to find out the answer to those questions. I'd made peace with being the family member who disappeared, the cautionary tale they probably told at dinner parties. I'd moved on until the phone call that changed everything.
Claire's call came on a Tuesday morning in October, right as I was reviewing financial statements for a major embezzlement case. I almost didn't answer. I was deep in the numbers, following a trail of shell companies and inflated invoices that led to a very expensive divorce settlement. But something about the persistence of the ring made me pick up. "Rachel? It's Claire. Your cousin Claire." The voice hit me like a time machine. Claire had been my closest ally during family gatherings, the one person who seemed to understand that I wasn't actually Satan incarnate. We'd lost touch when I left home, and hearing her voice brought back a flood of memories. Sneaking cookies from family reunions, rolling our eyes at our relatives' political rants, sharing secrets in the corners of wedding receptions. "Claire? Oh my God, how did you even get my number?" "I hired a private investigator," she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "Rachel, I'm so sorry to call you like this, but I didn't know what else to do. It's about your parents and Jake." The tone in her voice made my stomach drop. "What happened? Is someone hurt?" "It's worse than that," she whispered, like she was afraid someone might overhear. "Rachel, they're going to lose everything. The FBI raided your dad's company last week. They're investigating fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, the works. It's all over the local news. Your parents are devastated."
I set down my pen and leaned back in my chair, trying to process what she was telling me. The FBI? What kind of fraud? I don't know all the details, but from what I heard, they were inflating contract values, creating fake subcontractors, stuff like that. Jake was running a lot of the day-to-day operations. She paused. "Rachel, your dad's in the hospital. He had a heart attack when they served the warrant. He's okay, but Jesus. There's more. Ashley called off the engagement. She said she couldn't be associated with the scandal. Jake's been staying with your parents, but he's not handling it well. Your mom called me crying yesterday, asking if I knew anyone who could help, someone who understood financial crimes." I almost laughed at the irony. The family that had disowned me for being an embarrassment was now facing the kind of embarrassment that made teenage tattoos look like Sunday school achievements. "Why are you calling me, Claire? They made it pretty clear they don't want me in their lives." "Because you're the only one who might be able to help them," she said quietly. "Rachel, I know what happened between you and your family. I know they treated you terribly, but they're drowning and you're the only one who knows how to swim in these waters."
I stared out my office window at the city skyline, thinking about the 17-year-old girl who'd walked away from that house with nothing but a duffel bag and a compass tattoo. That girl would have felt vindicated by this news. She would have seen it as cosmic justice, proof that she'd been right to leave.
But I wasn't 17 anymore. I was a 30-year-old woman with a successful career and a life I'd built from scratch. I had the skills to help them, the knowledge to navigate the federal investigation, the connections to find the right lawyers. The question wasn't whether I could help them. The question was whether I wanted to. Rachel, are you still there? I'm here, I said finally. Send me everything you know about the investigation. News articles, court documents, whatever you can find. I'll review it and let you know what I think. Does that mean you'll help them? I touched the compass on my wrist, feeling the raised lines of the tattoo that had started this whole journey. It means I'll look. No promises beyond that. But even as I said it, I knew I was already packing my bags.
The flight home felt like traveling backward through time. I'd flown this route once before, 5 years ago, when I'd finally gotten up the courage to drive past the old house just to see if it looked the same. It did, of course. Same white siding, same perfect lawn, same American flag. I'd sat in my rental car for 10 minutes, then driven away without stopping. This time, there was no escaping. I'd spent the 3 days since Claire's call immersed in research. The case against Sinclair Construction was damning. Federal prosecutors had evidence of a systematic scheme to defraud the government on public works contracts. Shell companies with names like Midwest Concrete Solutions and Atlantic Masonry LLC that existed only on paper. Inflated invoices for materials that were never delivered. Kickbacks to city officials who approved permits. It was textbook corruption, the kind of case that federal prosecutors loved because it was so clean and obvious. What made it worse was that most of the fraudulent activity had happened in the last 5 years, exactly the period when Jake had been taking over more responsibility for the company. Either he was the mastermind behind the whole operation, or he was incredibly incompetent. Given what I remembered about my brother, I was betting on the former. The house looked smaller than I remembered, and shabbier. The paint was peeling around the window frames, and the lawn had brown patches that would have horrified my perfectionist mother. There were 2 news vans parked across the street, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like metallic flowers. I parked in the driveway behind a car I didn't recognize, probably a lawyer's BMW, and walked out the door. For a moment, I hesitated. The last time I'd stood on this porch, I'd been leaving forever. Now I was coming back as a stranger, a professional, here to clean up someone else's mess. Mom answered the door, and the sight of her nearly broke my composure. She'd aged decades in the 10 years since I'd seen her. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed, hung limp and gray around her face. She'd lost weight, and her clothes hung loose on her frame. But it was her eyes that shocked me most. They were hollow, defeated, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that had once made her formidable.
Rachel? Her voice was barely a whisper. Claire said you might, but I didn't believe. Hi, Mom. We stood there for a moment, neither of us knowing what to say. Then she stepped aside and let me in. The house smelled different. Not the usual combination of cleaning products and expensive candles, but something stale and desperate. The living room looked like a law firm had exploded in it. Boxes of documents everywhere, legal pads covered in notes, empty coffee cups on every surface. Jad was sitting in his recliner, looking like a shadow of the man who'd once commanded construction sites and intimidated city planners. He'd always been a big man, barrel-chested and loud, but now he seemed to have collapsed in on himself. His hair had gone completely white, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and crushing worry. "Bobby, Rachel's here." Mom said quietly. He looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but something like desperation. Rachel, I. we. I know, I said, sitting down on the couch across from him. Claire told me about the investigation. It's bad, he said, his voice rough. They froze all our accounts. I can't make payroll. The house is going into foreclosure. 25 years building this company, and it's all gone. I looked around the room, taking in the chaos of their situation. Where's Jake? Dad and Mom exchanged a look that spoke volumes. He's not handling this well, Mom said finally. He's been staying upstairs, barely comes down. He won't talk to the lawyers, won't explain what happened. He just keeps saying it's all a misunderstanding. Is it a misunderstanding? Dad's silence was answer enough. I spent the next hour reviewing the documents their lawyer had provided, and with each page, the picture became clearer. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a case of poor record keeping. This was systematic fraud, carefully planned and executed over years. Someone had been very smart about it, creating layers of fake companies and false documentation that would have taken serious effort to maintain.
That someone had Jake's fingerprints all over it. I need to talk to him, I said finally. He won't see you, Mom said quickly. He won't see anyone. He'll see me, I said, standing up, because I'm the only one who can help him now. I walked upstairs to Jake's old room, the same room where he'd spent his golden high school years planning his perfect future. I knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for permission. He was sitting on his old bed, staring at his phone, and when he looked up at me, I saw my brother clearly for the first time in years. Gone was the confident golden boy, the effortless charmer who'd coasted through life on good looks and family connections. In his place was a man who looked cornered, desperate, and smaller than I'd ever seen him. "Hello, Jake," I said, closing the door behind me. He stared at me for a long moment, then laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Well, well, the prodigal daughter returns. Come to gloat?" "I came to help." "Help!" He stood up, and I could see the anger building in his eyes. "Where were you when I needed help? Where were you when I was trying to keep this family together while you were off playing artist?" I was building a career in forensic accounting, which, as it turns out, is exactly what you need right now. That stopped him cold. He sat back down heavily, all the fight going out of him. "You're a forensic accountant?" "I specialize in financial fraud cases. I work with federal prosecutors to trace money trails and build cases against white-collar criminals." I let that sink in for a moment. "So believe me when I tell you that you're in serious trouble." He buried his face in his hands. "I never meant for it to go this far. Tell me what happened." And slowly, piece by piece, the truth came out.
Jake's confession took 3 hours. 3 hours of ugly truth spilling out of my golden boy brother like poison from a lanced wound. I sat in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by dusty trophies and faded pennants, listening to him describe the systematic destruction of our family's legacy. It had started in college, he told me, gambling, first just friendly poker games in the dorm, then bigger games off campus, then online betting that spiraled out of control. By senior year, he owed $40,000 to people who didn't accept late payments. Dad had always been generous with money, but not that generous, and Jake was too proud to admit he'd screwed up. "I thought I could pay it back after graduation," he said, not meeting my eyes. Dad was so excited about me joining the company. He kept talking about how I was going to take over someday, how we were going to expand, maybe go national. I figured I'd work for a few years, pay off the debt, and nobody would ever have to know. But the debt had interest, and Jake had kept gambling, convinced that one big win would solve everything.
By the time he'd been working at Sinclair Construction for 2 years, he owed over $100,000, and the people he owed were making increasingly unsubtle threats about what would happen if he didn't pay up. That's when he'd started skimming from the company. Just small amounts at first, a few hundred here and there from petty cash, inflated expense reports, nothing that would be noticed. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. "Dad trusted me completely," Jake said, his voice hollow. "He signed whatever I put in front of him. He was so proud that his son was taking initiative, handling the business side while he focused on the actual construction. He never questioned anything." The scheme had grown more sophisticated over time. Jake had created shell companies to provide fake services to Sinclair Construction. He'd inflated material costs and pocketed the difference. He'd bid on government contracts using falsified credentials and minority-owned business certifications. He'd paid kickbacks to city officials to ensure Sinclair got the contracts, then inflated the final bills to recover the bribes.
"I kept telling myself it was temporary," he said, "just until I could get ahead of the debt. But every time I'd pay some of it off, I'd lose more gambling. And the company was making so much money from the government contracts that nobody questioned the profits." The FBI had been investigating the city's contracting process for months before they'd turned their attention to Sinclair Construction. Jake had been smart enough to cover his tracks in the short term, but not smart enough to realize that federal investigators had resources and patience that local auditors didn't. They'd traced the shell companies, analyzed the bidding patterns, and built an airtight case. "The worst part," Jake said, finally looking at me, "is that Dad thinks it's his fault. He keeps saying he should have paid more attention, should have supervised me better. He has no idea that I've been stealing from him for years." I sat there processing everything he'd told me, trying to separate my personal feelings from the professional assessment I needed to make. The damage was extensive, not just the financial fraud, but the tax evasion, the false certifications, and the bribery. The federal prosecutors had enough evidence to put Jake away for 20 years. "How much?" I asked, finally. "What? How much did you steal? Total." He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. $2.5 million, he whispered. "Maybe 3. I lost track." I closed my eyes and tried not to think about what that number meant. $3 million. More than enough to destroy the company, bankrupt the family, and send everyone involved to federal prison. "Rachel," Jake said, his voice desperate, "can you help me? Can you fix this?" I looked at my brother, really looked at him. Gone was the arrogant golden boy who'd made my childhood miserable. In his place was a broken man who'd gambled away his family's future and was finally facing the consequences of his choices. "I can't fix this," I said finally. "This isn't an accounting error or a misunderstanding. This is systematic fraud on a massive scale. The FBI has evidence, witnesses, documentation. There's no covering this up." His face crumpled. "So that's it? I'm going to prison?" "Probably. But there might be a way to minimize the damage to Mom and Dad." He looked up at me with something like hope in his eyes. "If you cooperate fully with the investigation, if you plead guilty and provide complete documentation of everything you did, the prosecutors might be willing to focus their case on you instead of the company. Dad could claim he was deceived by a trusted employee, his own son. It would be humiliating, but it might keep him out of prison. And me? You'd probably get 10 to 15 years instead of 20 to life. And you'd have to pay restitution. Every penny you can find." Jake was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. "What about the company? Can it be saved?" "Not as it is. The government will seize the assets, audit everything, probably shut it down, but—" I paused, thinking through the possibilities. If someone with clean hands took over, restructured the debts, demonstrated new leadership and transparency, maybe something could be rebuilt. Someone like who?
I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where I'd grown up. The news vans were still there, waiting for the next development in the story. In a week or two, they'd move on to some other scandal, but the damage to the Sinclair name would be permanent, unless someone changed the narrative. Someone like me, I said.
The federal courthouse in downtown Springfield looked like a fortress, all gray stone and barred windows, designed to intimidate anyone who entered. I'd been inside dozens of times as an expert witness, but never on a case this personal. Today, Jake would enter his guilty plea and begin the process of dismantling everything our father had built. I sat in the back row, watching my brother stand before the judge in his ill-fitting suit. He'd lost weight over the past 3 months, and his face had a hollow quality that made him look older than his 32 years. When the judge asked if he understood the consequences of his plea, Jake's voice was barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." Mom and Dad weren't there. Dad was too sick. The stress had triggered another heart attack, and he was in the cardiac unit at Springfield General. Mom was with him, of course, maintaining her vigil by his bedside. They'd aged years in the months since the investigation began, and I wasn't sure either of them would survive seeing their golden boy sentenced to federal prison. The plea hearing took less than an hour. Jake admitted to mail fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government. The judge scheduled sentencing for 8 weeks later, and Jake was released on bond pending that hearing. As he walked past me on his way out, he stopped and looked at me with eyes that held no trace of the arrogant boy I'd grown up with. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." I nodded, but didn't trust myself to speak. Despite everything he'd done, despite the years of cruelty and dismissal, he was still my brother, and seeing him destroyed like this gave me no satisfaction at all. Outside the courthouse, I met with Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen, the prosecutor who'd been handling the case. She was sharp, professional, and had been surprisingly cooperative once I'd explained my proposal. "The asset forfeiture hearing is scheduled for next month," she said, gathering her files. "If you're serious about this restructuring plan, you'll need to have your financing in place by then." "I'll be ready." "I have to ask, why are you doing this? You could walk away, let the government liquidate everything, and never look back. Given your family history, I'd understand if you wanted nothing to do with this mess." I thought about her question as I walked back to my rental car. Why was I doing this? It wasn't loyalty to my family. They'd made it clear years ago that I wasn't welcome. It wasn't sentiment about the family business. I'd never been part of it. It wasn't even about the money, though the financial opportunity was significant. It was about the compass tattoo on my wrist and the promise I'd made to myself at 16 to always follow my true north. My true north wasn't revenge or vindication. It was justice. And justice meant more than just punishing the guilty. It meant protecting the innocent, helping the victims, and building something better from the wreckage. Over the next 6 weeks, I worked 18-hour days restructuring what was left of Sinclair Construction. I brought in a team of forensic accountants to trace every dollar, hired employment lawyers to negotiate with the union, and found investors willing to back a new vision for the company. The new entity would be called Compass Construction, a name that honored both my personal journey and our new direction. Instead of chasing high-profit government contracts, we'd focus on affordable housing for low-income families, community development projects, and sustainable building practices. Instead of maximizing shareholder profits, we'd operate as a B corporation, balancing profit with social and environmental responsibility. Most importantly, we'd operate with complete transparency. Every contract would be public, every financial statement would be audited by independent accountants, and every employee would be trained in ethical business practices. We'd be the anti-Sinclair Construction, proving that you could build a successful business without cutting corners or compromising values. The transition wasn't smooth. Many of the old employees were suspicious of the new ownership, especially when they learned that the disgraced daughter was now running the show. Several key supervisors quit rather than work for me.
Some of our traditional clients canceled their contracts, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. But slowly, we began to attract new people. Young architects excited about sustainable design, construction workers tired of the old boys network, community activists who'd been fighting for affordable housing, city officials who wanted to partner with a company they could trust. Our first project was a development of 24 affordable housing units in the part of town where I'd lived after leaving home. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was literally building homes for people like the scared 17-year-old I'd once been. The project was challenging, with tight budgets and demanding timelines, but it was also deeply satisfying in a way that profit-maximizing contracts never could have been. 3 months after the restructuring, I was reviewing project plans in my new office when my assistant buzzed me. "Miss Sinclair? Your mother is here to see you." I looked up from the blueprints, surprised. Mom had been polite but distant since I'd taken over the company. She'd thanked me for helping with the legal situation and for taking care of the business, but we'd barely spoken beyond that. I'd assumed she blamed me for Jake's imprisonment, for the public humiliation the family had endured. Send her in.
Mom walked into my office slowly, looking around at the changes I'd made. Gone were Dad's hunting trophies and golf photos, replaced by architectural drawings and photos from our construction sites. The massive oak desk had been replaced with a simple glass table that encouraged collaboration rather than intimidation. "It looks different," she said finally. "Everything's different now." She sat down across from me, and I noticed she was carrying a manila envelope. "I came to give you this," she said, sliding it across the table. "I found it in your father's desk when I was cleaning out his office." Inside the envelope were newspaper clippings, dozens of them, dating back over the years. Articles about my college graduation, my first job, my promotion to senior analyst, a review of my art show from 5 years ago, a photo from a charity gala where I'd been recognized for pro bono work with domestic violence victims. "He kept track of you," Mom said quietly. "He was proud of you, even if he never said it. We both were." I stared at the clippings, feeling something crack open in my chest. "Then why didn't you ever—" "Because we were proud and stupid and afraid," she said, tears starting to flow. "Because it was easier to pretend you didn't exist than to admit we'd been wrong. Because your father's ego couldn't handle the fact that the daughter he'd driven away was more successful than the son he'd doted on." I reached across the table and took her hand. It felt smaller than I remembered, more fragile. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything, for the way we treated you, for the things we said, for making you feel like you had to choose between being yourself and being part of this family." "Mom," she continued, "you saved us. Not just the business, but all of us. Your father's getting better, partly because he knows someone he trusts is taking care of things. Jake's going to prison, but he's alive and he's getting the help he needs for his gambling addiction. And me, I'm learning to live with the truth instead of pretending everything's perfect." I squeezed her hand gently. "I didn't do it for you," I said, but not unkindly. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." She nodded, understanding. "That's what makes you better than all of us." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the construction crews work on the affordable housing project outside my window. Finally, Mom stood to leave. "Rachel," she said, pausing at the door, Would you like to come to dinner this Sunday? Nothing fancy, just family dinner. If you want to." I looked at the compass tattoo on my wrist, then at the woman who'd given birth to me, but had never really known me. "I'd like that," I said. After she left, I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the evidence of the new life I'd built from the ashes of the old one. Outside, the sun was setting over the construction site,
casting long shadows across the foundation of what would soon be homes for families who needed a fresh start. I touched the compass on my wrist and smiled. 20 years after getting that tattoo, I was finally heading in the right direction. Not just north, but home. The real home I've been searching for all along, the one I'd built myself, brick by brick, choice by choice, with my own hands and my own moral compass pointing the way. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't running away from anything. I was running toward everything I was meant to become. Have you ever been treated like the black sheep? What did you do? If this story moved you, follow for more true life twists and powerful redemptions.